Danny Boy. For those of you who don't know, the era of the 1980s wasn't the best time for a kid to grow up in America. Back then, there was a so-called satanic panic going on. Kids were going missing left and right, and everyone was convinced that the cults were to blame. This blaming it on the Satanist attitude was especially apparent where I grew up, in South Carolina. Around there, blaming non-Christians for problems was as much a part of the culture as guns, sweet tea, and going to church on Sundays. I grew up in a small town in the Sunshine State, but the state soon proved to grow cloudier and cloudier around me as time went on. Things began to go downhill for me when I was 12 years old. I grew up in a little one-story house with my parents and my 8-year-old brother, Danny. It's safe to say that Danny could be pretty annoying sometimes. In fact, looking back, I'd say he was on my nerves more than he was off. Still, I loved the kid, deep down. Once in a while, he and I got along, and the moments that we did see eye to eye, well, they were truly memorable. Our times together ceased on April 13th, 1984. That day seems like a dream to me now, a distant memory. Danny and I had just gotten home from school. Our father was still at work and our mother was gone too, leaving a note on the fridge for us. Went to Jen's, please run to supermarket and pick up eggs so I can make your cake. The following day was my birthday. I had almost forgotten. Well, I told Danny to stay put while I ran to the store, but the little bugger informed me that he was coming along. Of course, I argued with him. I did not need him coming with me to the store. He'd been annoying me the entire walk home from school. As I argued with him, I knew in the back of my mind that I'd have to take him. I mean, come on, the kid was 8 years old. I couldn't leave him home alone. My parents would kill me for that. I finally gave in, told him to shut his mouth and keep it shut, and set out the door with him. Of course, the little annoyance bugged me the entire way. By the time we got to the supermarket, I was about ready to clobber him. All I did, however, was pull him to the side and scold him for about a minute. Looking back on it now, I wish I hadn't. I wish I just embraced his annoyingness. Well, I turned away from the brat and made a beeline to the store, toward the poultry aisle. Always having trouble finding things in the supermarket, I was overjoyed I was able to find the eggs. I found the aisle, opened the cold fridge door, and grabbed the eggs. All that was left to do was check out and find Danny. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even kept track of my little brother after I scolded him. I frantically searched the store, and after not being able to find him for several minutes, I began to ask customers if they had seen a short, blonde-headed boy. No one had a clue. I even resorted to getting customer service to call him, but my little brother did not come. The worst part was going home and telling my parents. I felt terrible. The next day was the worst birthday ever, as you can imagine. I still hate my birthday for this reason. For weeks, the police searched for him. My parents frantically combed the entire town, always stopping to post missing person signs all over the place. I couldn't even think of what could have happened. I was scolded by my parents every night for it. My dad quickly slipped into depression, taking to alcohol as a means of escape. After a month, the search was called off. No one had any idea where Danny was. He had disappeared without a trace. A couple weeks after the search was called off, the police called my parents, showing them a photograph they had found in a parking lot of an abandoned store. The case remains open to this day. One question. David was perched on the edge of his bed, his bloodshot eyes darting restlessly around the room like a hummingbird in flight. He mindlessly picked at the myriad of scabs that dotted his arms and legs. Behind him, there were books scattered about. Some looked old, others new, and a few were his school notebooks. At first, it looked like he'd been doing research all night, but the candles and incense burning about the room told me differently. He had been acting weird these past few weeks, and tonight, I came up to his room with several questions in mind. Now I had only one. Where is my son? The strange death of Mary Reeser. On July 2nd, 1951, at about 8 a.m. in St. Petersburg, Florida, Miss Reeder's landlady came to give Miss Mary Reeser a telegram and some coffee. When she found that the metal door knob was hot to the touch, after enlisting the help of some carpenters working nearby, she eventually forced the door open. Inside, they found the cremated remains of Miss Reeser. Most of her body was in ashes, the only surviving parts being her backbone and left foot, still with a slipper on it. Her skull was also found, shrunken to the size of a teacup, with all facial features removed. After calling the police, an investigation was launched by the local police chief, J.R. Reichert. The investigation found that although Reeser's body was totally cremated, the rest of the room was largely unaffected. Only a few appliances had been melted and made soft due to the heat. The socket had also melted, stopping the clock at 2:26 a.m. The police were baffled at a fire that caused so much damage to Miss Reeser. The temperature was estimated at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, could leave the rest of the house, indeed much of the room, intact. During the investigation, Reichert sent FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to take several items from the crime scene, including glass fragments found in the ashes, small, charred pieces of teeth, some carpet, and a slipper. In response, Hoover sent a team of FBI investigators and physical anthropologist Wilton Krogman, as well as notifying President Harry S. Truman. After weeks of investigation, the FBI declared the Reeser had died due to the wiki effect. As a known user of sleeping pills, they concluded that she had fallen asleep while smoking and set fire to her nightgown. They reasoned that the human body has enough fat and other inflammable substances for the body to be set alight, like a candle. This would therefore allow large amounts of destruction. However, both Reichert and Krogman disagreed on the conclusion made by the FBI. Krogman remarked that I find it hard to believe that a human body, once ignited, would literally consume itself, burn itself out, as does a candle wick, guttering the last residual pool of melted wax. Just what did happen on the night of July 1st, 1951, in St. Petersburg, Florida? We may never know, though this case still haunts me, and on the shrunken skull he wrote, "The head is not left complete in ordinary burning cases. Certainly it did not shrivel or symmetrically reduce to a smaller size. In presence of heat sufficient to destroy soft tissue, the skull would literally explode in many pieces. I have never known any exception to this rule." After finally concluding that I cannot conceive of such complete cremation without more burning of the apartment itself, in fact, the apartment and everything in it should have been consumed, I regard it as the most amazing thing I have ever seen, as I review it. The short hairs on my neck bristle with vague fear. Were I living in the Middle Ages, I'd mutter something about black magic. Krogman then put forward the idea that Reeser was murdered with crematorium equipment, but with no explanation for the melted appliances. We may never know who or what caused Miss Reeser to ignite in her armchair on July 2nd, 1951 at 2:26 a.m. Whether you believe in the paranormal or in spontaneous human combustion, the case does tell us this. Perhaps truth can be stranger than fiction.